The snowflakes were already thick as wool when Zara Caldwell realized she had made a terrible mistake riding out alone that December evening in 1882. The wind howled through the pines of the Colorado mountains like a wounded animal, and her mare stumbled yet again on the treacherous trail that wound through the wilderness outside Black Hawk. She had left town 3 hours earlier, insisting she could reach the Peterson ranch before nightfall to deliver the medicine old Mrs. Peterson desperately needed. The shopkeeper had warned her about the storm rolling in from the west, but Zara had inherited her father's stubborn streak along with his medical practice after he passed 2 years ago. At 23, she had proven herself capable countless times, but tonight the mountain was teaching her humility in the harshest way possible. The visibility had reduced to mere feet in front of her face. Snow clung to her eyelashes, and the wool scarf wrapped around her nose and mouth. Her fingers ached inside her leather gloves, and she could barely feel the reins anymore. The mare whinnied nervously, her hooves sliding on ice hidden beneath fresh powder. Zara tried to calm her, but her own voice was swallowed by the roaring wind. She knew they had veered off the main trail at least 20 minutes ago, but in the whiteout conditions, she could not determine which direction would lead them back to safety. Every tree looked identical, every snow-covered boulder just another obstacle in an endless white nightmare. Then the ground simply disappeared beneath them. The mare screamed, a sound that would haunt Zara for years to come, as they plunged over the edge of what she later learned was a ravine cutting deep into the mountainside. Zara felt herself falling, tumbling through space and snow, her body separating from the horse. She hit the slope hard, the breath knocked from her lungs, and then she was rolling, sliding, her hands grasping at anything to stop her descent. Rock tore at her coat, branches whipped her face, and then with a jarring impact that sent lightning through her left leg, she crashed onto a narrow ledge jutting from the ravine wall. Above her, she heard the mare's fading cries as the animal continued falling into the darkness below. The sound ended with a sickening thud that made Zara's stomach turn. She lay there gasping, each breath a knife in her ribs. Pain radiated from her leg in waves so intense she thought she might vomit. When she tried to move, agony shot through her ankle and she cried out, the sound immediately swallowed by the storm. Snow continued to fall into the ravine, already beginning to cover her prone form. She could barely see the rim above her, perhaps 30 feet up, maybe more. The ledge she had landed on was perhaps 4 feet wide and extended maybe 6 feet along the ravine wall before narrowing to nothing. Beyond its edge was only darkness and the howling void. If she had fallen just a foot to either side, she would have missed the ledge entirely and followed her mare into the abyss. Zara forced herself to think through the panic threatening to overwhelm her. Her medical bag was gone, torn from her shoulder during the fall. One of her gloves had been ripped away, and already her bare hand was going numb. She tried to push herself into a sitting position against the ravine wall, but the pain in her leg made her vision go white. She felt blood running down her face from a gash somewhere on her forehead. Her ribs screamed with every breath. She was trapped on a ledge in a ravine during a blizzard at night, and no one knew where she was. No one would even begin to look for her until morning at the earliest, and by then she would be buried under snow or dead from exposure. She had never felt so utterly alone in her entire life. Tears froze on her cheeks as she pulled her knees up as much as her injured leg would allow, trying to conserve what little warmth remained in her body. She thought of her father, wondered if she would see him again soon. She thought of the small house in Black Hawk that she had turned into both home and medical office. She thought of Mrs. Peterson, who would die without the medicine Zara had been carrying. She thought of all the patients who depended on her, the only doctor for 50 miles. And she thought how foolish she had been to venture out alone in such weather, how pride had always been her greatest flaw. Time became meaningless. She drifted in and out of consciousness, unsure if minutes or hours had passed. The cold had moved beyond pain into something almost peaceful, a numbness that spread through her limbs and made her feel sleepy. Some distant part of her medical training recognized this as a dangerous sign, but she was so tired, and sleep seemed so inviting. She let her eyes close, let the darkness pull her down into its embrace. She did not hear the horse approaching along the rim of the ravine above. She did not hear the man calling out into the storm, his voice hoarse from searching. She did not see the lantern light cutting through the snow like a beacon of hope. She only became aware of the world again when a voice, strong and urgent, cut through the fog in her mind. "Down here. Someone's down here." Zara's eyes fluttered open. She tried to call out, but her voice emerged as barely a whisper. She tried again, forcing air through her frozen throat. Help! It was pathetic, weak, but it was all she had. The light grew stronger above her. A face appeared over the rim, illuminated by lantern light, features obscured by a thick beard crusted with ice and a hat pulled low against the storm. "Hold on. I'm coming down to you." She wanted to tell him to be careful, that the rocks were slick with ice, that he might fall, but the words would not come. She watched as the face disappeared, heard voices conferring above, and then a rope came snaking down through the snow, its end landing just inches from her outstretched hand. The rope went taut, and then a man was rappelling down the ravine wall, his boots finding purchase on rocks she had not even known were there. He moved with the confidence of someone who had done this before, who knew these mountains like others knew their own homes. When he reached her ledge, he secured himself to an outcropping and immediately turned his attention to her. Up close, she could see he was young, perhaps 26 or 27, with intense eyes the color of storm clouds and a face weathered by sun and wind. Ice clung to his dark beard and the collar of his heavy coat. He pulled off one of his gloves and touched her face with surprising gentleness. "You're freezing. We need to get you up top right now. Can you move?" "My leg," she managed through chattering teeth. "Broken, I think." He glanced down at her left leg, his jaw tightening. "We will have to splint it best we can, but we cannot stay down here. The temperature is still dropping, and this ledge won't hold both of us if the ice gives way." He was already moving, efficient and purposeful, pulling rope from his shoulder. "My name is Xander Parrish. I'm going to tie this around you, and my brothers up top are going to pull you up while I guide you. It's going to hurt like hell when we move you. I won't lie about that." "Zara Caldwell," she whispered. There was a mare. His expression shifted, became more somber. "I'm sorry. We will deal with that later. Right now, I need you to stay conscious. Can you do that for me, Zara?" Something about the way he said her name with such earnest concern made her want to try. She nodded, and he began working the rope around her torso, creating a harness that would distribute the weight. His hands were steady despite the cold, his movements practiced. She found herself focusing on his face, using it as an anchor against the pain and the cold. There was something solid about him, something that made her believe she might actually survive this. "I've got 3 brothers up top," he said as he worked, clearly trying to keep her engaged. "We were heading back to our ranch when I thought I heard something. They said I was crazy, that no one would be out in this storm, but I couldn't shake the feeling. We searched for the better part of an hour before we found the tracks that led to this ravine." He finished tying the rope and tested it with a sharp tug. "Looks like my gut was right for once. Ready." She was not ready, would never be ready, but she nodded anyway. Xander called up to his brothers, and then hands were gripping her shoulders and under her arms. "On three," he said. "1, 2, 3. The pain when they lifted her was beyond anything she had ever experienced. She felt the broken bone grinding, felt her ribs protesting, felt every bruise and laceration on her body screaming in unison. She bit down on her scarf to keep from screaming, tasted blood where her teeth cut into her lip. Xander guided her up the ravine wall, keeping her away from the sharp rocks, his voice a constant stream of encouragement. "That's it, you're doing great. Just a little more. Stay with me, Zara. Don't you dare pass out on me now. Almost there. Come on. You're stronger than this mountain. I can see it in you." When hands reached down and pulled her over the rim, she did scream then, unable to hold it back. She was laid on a blanket someone had spread in the snow, and she could see 3 other faces now, all bearing a resemblance to Xander. Brothers, as he had said. They were already working to cover her with more blankets, trying to shelter her from the worst of the wind. Xander hauled himself over the rim with the rope, breathing hard from the exertion, and immediately came to kneel beside her. "We need to get her to the ranch," one of the brothers said. He was older than Xander, with the same strong jaw but lighter hair. "She won't last long in this. The homestead is closer," another argued, this one younger, barely into his 20s. "Maybe 2 miles northeast. The ranch has the doctor's supplies," the third brother interjected. He appeared to be near Xander's age, perhaps a twin. "Father brought them from Denver last month. I'm the doctor," Zara managed to say through chattering teeth. All 4 brothers turned to look at her in surprise. "Black Hawk. I'm the town doctor." Xander's expression shifted to something between respect and concern. "Then you know how serious this is. Your leg needs to be set properly, and you need to get warm or you are going to lose fingers and toes to frostbite if we are not careful. The homestead is closest, and we can keep you warm there until the storm breaks. Then we will get you back to town where you can tell us what to do." She wanted to argue, to insist they take her to Black Hawk immediately, but she knew he was right. She could already feel the dangerous lethargy trying to pull her back under. Xander was giving orders to his brothers, directing them to prepare the horses, to secure the blankets around her. When he lifted her into his arms to carry her to his horse, she bit back another cry of pain. He held her carefully, trying to jostle her injured leg as little as possible. "I've got you," he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. "I promise I've got you." He mounted his horse with her cradled against his chest, and one of his brothers handed up more blankets to wrap around them both. Xander opened his heavy coat and pulled her inside against his body, sharing his warmth. She could hear his heart beating steady and strong beneath her ear. The other brothers mounted their horses, and they began moving through the storm, headed northeast according to the older brother, who seemed to know these trails even in complete darkness. The ride was a blur of pain and cold. Zara drifted in and out of awareness, sometimes certain they had been riding for hours, other times convinced only seconds had passed. Xander held her securely, one arm around her back, the other controlling the reins. He spoke to her occasionally, asking her questions she could barely process, trying to keep her conscious. She learned his brothers were named Xavier, Xylon, and Xerxes, that they ran a cattle ranch with their father about 8 miles south of Black Hawk, that Xander had been a scout for the army before returning home 5 years ago. The information floated through her mind like snow, impossible to hold on to, but his voice was an anchor she clung to. When they finally reached the homestead, it appeared through the storm like a miracle. It was a small log cabin, sturdy and square, with smoke rising from the chimney. Xander dismounted carefully with Zara still in his arms and carried her inside while his brothers tended to the horses. The warmth of the cabin hit her like a physical force after the brutal cold, and she gasped at the sensation. He laid her on a bed in the corner, and she could see the cabin was a simple one-room structure, clearly used by the brothers when they needed shelter in this part of their range. Xavier, the oldest brother, was already building up the fire while Xylon brought in supplies from the saddlebags. Xerxes, the one who might have been Xander's twin, was heating water in a pot over the fire. They moved with the practiced efficiency of men who had worked together their entire lives. Xander knelt beside the bed, his face close to hers, his hands carefully unwrapping the frozen blankets and coat that encased her. "We need to check you for frostbite," he said gently. "And then we need to set that leg. I have done it for horses and once for Xavier when he broke his arm falling off a fence, but I have never done it for anyone else. You are going to have to tell me what to do." Zara tried to focus, to pull her medical knowledge to the front of her mind. Her hands were already being submerged in lukewarm water that Xerxes brought over, and the pain as circulation began to return made her gasp. Xander checked her feet next, his touch gentle as he removed her boots and socks. She could see his relief when he examined her toes. "No blackening," he said. "That's good, right?" "Yes," she managed. "That's good. My fingers." He checked them carefully, comparing each one to normal color and sensation. "They look all right. Red and swollen but not frostbitten. You were lucky." Lucky, she thought. She supposed she was, given that she should be dead at the bottom of that ravine. She watched as Xander turned his attention to her leg, carefully cutting away her trouser leg to expose the injury. She saw his jaw tighten at what he revealed. Her ankle was swollen to twice its normal size, mottled with bruising that had already turned spectacular shades of purple and black. She could see the unnatural angle of it, knew it was definitely broken. "Tell me what to do," Xander said, meeting her eyes. There was a steadiness in his gaze that gave her confidence. She walked him through it, her voice growing stronger as she fell into the familiar role of physician. She told Xavier to prepare splints from the firewood, told Xylon to tear strips from one of the blankets for binding. She told Xerxes to get her as much whiskey as they had, both to drink and to clean the wounds. When Xander had to straighten and set the bone, she drank half a bottle of whiskey in 3 long swallows and bit down on a leather belt. The pain when he pulled and reset the bone made her vision go white, made her scream into the leather until her throat was raw. But his hands were sure, and when it was done, the ankle was straight again, properly splinted and wrapped. She must have passed out after that, because when she opened her eyes again, it was to find herself clean and dressed in a large shirt that must have belonged to one of the brothers, tucked under multiple blankets with the fire crackling nearby. The storm still raged outside. She could hear the wind howling, but inside the cabin was warm and smelled of coffee and something cooking. Her head had been bandaged, she realized, reaching up to touch the cloth wrapped around her forehead. Her ribs had been wrapped as well, tight but not too tight, allowing her to breathe. Xander sat in a chair beside the bed, whittling something from a piece of wood. When he noticed her eyes open, he set the knife and wood aside immediately and leaned forward. "Welcome back," he said with a slight smile. "You have been out for about 3 hours. How do you feel?" "Like I fell into a ravine," she said, and was surprised when he laughed, a warm sound that filled the cabin. "That's a good sign. If you can make jokes, you are going to be fine." He reached for a cup of water on the small table beside the bed and helped her drink. "The storm is still going strong. We are stuck here until it passes, probably tomorrow afternoon at the earliest. My brothers rode out about an hour ago to head back to the main ranch and let our father know what happened. They will send word to Black Hawk that you are alive and safe. It will just be you and me here until we can get you home." Zara processed this information, trying to ignore the flutter of nervousness at being alone with a man she had just met, even if he had saved her life. But she could see nothing predatory in his expression, only genuine concern and a touch of exhaustion. He looked as tired as she felt. "You should rest too," she said. "You climbed down a ravine in a blizzard. That could not have been easy." He shrugged, but she could see the gesture was dismissive of his own fatigue rather than her concern. "I have done harder things. And someone had to make sure you did not stop breathing in your sleep. You took a bad hit to the head. Did you undress me?" The question came out before she could stop it, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks despite the cold she had so recently escaped. Xander's ears turned red. "Only what was necessary to check your injuries and get you into dry clothes. I was as respectful as possible. I swear it. And you are a doctor, so you know how important it was to get you out of those wet things." She did know, and she appreciated that he had done what needed to be done without making her feel violated or ashamed. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. You saved my life tonight. If you had not been out there, if you had not heard me." "Don't think about that," he interrupted gently. "You are alive. That is what matters." He stood and walked to the fire, ladling something from a pot into a bowl. "You need to eat. It is just stew, nothing fancy, but it will help warm you from the inside." He helped her sit up, propping her against the wall with pillows, and she realized the cabin truly was quite small. There was the bed she occupied, the chair Xander had been sitting in, a table with 2 chairs near the fire, shelves with supplies and hooks on the walls for coats and equipment. The ceiling was low, the walls bare logs chinked with mud. It was functional rather than comfortable, a working shelter rather than a home. The stew was simple but good, thick with meat and potatoes and carrots. Zara ate slowly, her appetite returning with each bite. Xander sat across from her, eating his own portion, and she found herself studying him in the firelight. He was handsome in a rough way, she decided, all strong lines and weathered skin. His hands were scarred and calloused from years of ranch work, but she remembered how gentle they had been when setting her leg. His dark hair was overlong, curling slightly at the ends where it touched his collar. When he caught her looking, she quickly focused on her stew, embarrassed to be caught staring. "How long have you been a doctor?" he asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "I studied for 4 years back east," she said. "Philadelphia. Then I came back here to work with my father 2 years ago. He died 6 months after I returned. Heart gave out. Since then, I have been the only doctor in Black Hawk." She took another spoonful of stew. People were skeptical at first. A woman doctor was unusual enough, but one so young made them nervous. "I have proven myself, though. Most of them trust me now." "You must be smart," Xander said, "and brave to take on something like that, or stubborn," she replied. "My father always said I was too stubborn for my own good. Tonight proved him right. I should never have tried to reach the Peterson ranch in that storm." "Mrs. Peterson?" Xander's expression grew concerned. "Is she ill?" "Very. Pneumonia. Without the medicine I was carrying, she might not make it another week." The loss of her medical bag weighed on her. All those supplies gone, and Mrs. Peterson would suffer for Zara's foolish pride. "When the storm breaks, we will get word to my father," Xander said firmly. "He can ride to Black Hawk and have someone bring medicine out to the Petersons. It will be all right." She wanted to believe him, appreciated his attempts to reassure her. They finished eating in silence, and then Xander insisted she rest again. She did not argue, exhaustion pulling at her like a physical weight. He banked the fire and settled into the chair beside her bed, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. "You should take the bed," she protested. "You have been awake as long as I have, longer even." "I will rest here," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "If you need anything during the night, I want to be close enough to hear you." She wanted to argue further, but the truth was his presence comforted her. After coming so close to dying alone in that ravine, having someone nearby felt like a gift. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her, secure in the knowledge that Xander Parrish was standing watch. She woke several times during the night, once from pain, once from a nightmare where she was falling endlessly through white snow. Each time, Xander was there, helping her drink water, checking her bandages, speaking in low, soothing tones until she calmed. By the time dawn broke, she felt almost human again despite the pain that still radiated through her body. The storm had not diminished. If anything, it seemed worse, the wind screaming around the cabin with renewed fury. Xander made coffee and something he called flapjacks, which turned out to be surprisingly good despite being cooked over an open fire. They ate together at the small table, Xander having carried her there despite her protests that she could hop on one foot. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, wanting to fill the silence with something other than the howling wind. Xander's face brightened. "It is called the Four Brothers Ranch, though that name did not come until after all four of us were born. My father started it 30 years ago with my mother. They came out from Missouri with nothing but a wagon, 2 horses, and a dream. Now we run about 3,000 head of cattle across 15,000 acres. Pride colored his voice. It has been a hard life, but a good one. We lost our mother 8 years ago to influenza, and since then it has just been the 5 of us men trying to keep everything running." "That must have been difficult," Zara said softly. "Losing your mother." "It was the hardest thing we have ever gone through," he admitted. "She was the heart of our family. After she died, we all buried ourselves in work, tried to outrun the grief. I think that is why I went into the army, to get away from the ranch and all the memories. But eventually I realized running did not help. I came home, and we learned how to be a family again, just the 5 of us." Zara understood loss. She had lost her mother at 15 to a fever, had lost her father just as she was beginning to work beside him. "My father taught me everything I know about medicine," she found herself saying. He believed women were just as capable as men of being physicians, which was unusual for his generation. "He made sure I had the best education, supported me even when others said it was improper. I miss him every single day." "He would be proud of you," Xander said with conviction. "You are out here alone, taking care of an entire town, risking your life in storms to bring medicine to patients. That takes courage." "Or stupidity," she countered, but she smiled as she said it. They spent the day talking, learning about each other in the way people do when thrown together by circumstance. Xander told her about growing up on the ranch, about learning to ride before he could walk, about cattle drives and winters so harsh they lost half the herd. He told her about his time as an Army scout, tracking Ute and Arapaho movements through these same mountains, though he spoke of it with regret rather than pride, acknowledging the injustices done to the native peoples who had lived on this land long before settlers arrived. Zara told him about her studies in Philadelphia, about being one of only 3 women in her medical school class, about the professors who had tried to fail her simply because of her gender and the ones who had championed her. She told him about her first solo surgery, about the terrifying responsibility of holding someone's life in her hands. She told him about Black Hawk, about the miners and their families who came to her with everything from broken bones to childhood fevers, about the satisfaction of helping people heal. As the day wore on, she found herself growing more comfortable with him. He had an easy way about him, a quiet confidence that did not need to prove itself. He made her laugh with stories about his brother's antics, and he listened intently when she spoke, as though her words truly mattered to him. When he changed the dressing on her head wound, his touch was gentle and sure. When he checked her splinted leg, he was careful not to cause unnecessary pain. By evening, the storm finally began to diminish. The wind died down to a dull roar, and the snow lessened from a blinding wall to a steady fall. Xander stood at the window, looking out at the white landscape. "If this keeps up, we should be able to head out by morning," he said. "The snow is deep, but the horses can manage it. We will take it slow, make sure we do not jostle your leg too much." Part of her was relieved. She needed to get back to Black Hawk, back to her patients, back to the life she had built. But another part of her, a part she was reluctant to examine too closely, felt disappointed that her time alone with Xander was coming to an end. She had enjoyed talking with him, had felt something spark between them that went beyond gratitude for her rescue. But she was being foolish. He was a rancher who lived miles from town, and she was a doctor with responsibilities that kept her tied to Black Hawk. Their lives had intersected by chance, and soon they would diverge again. That night, as she lay in bed and he settled once more into the chair with his blanket, she found herself speaking into the darkness. "Xander, why did you stop? That night in the storm. Your brothers said you were the one who insisted on searching. Why?" There was a long silence, and she thought perhaps he had already fallen asleep. But then his voice came, quiet and thoughtful. "I cannot explain it. I just had this feeling, this certainty that someone was out there and needed help. My brothers thought I was crazy, and maybe I was. But I could not shake it. It felt like if I rode away, I would regret it for the rest of my life." He paused. "I am glad I listened to that feeling. I am glad we found you." "So am I," she whispered. Morning brought clear skies and a world transformed into white silence. The snow had finally stopped, and the sun rose over the mountains in shades of pink and gold that took Zara's breath away. Xander helped her dress in her own clothes, which he had dried by the fire, though her left trouser leg had been cut away to accommodate the splint. He fashioned a crutch from a sturdy branch, padding the top with strips of blanket. Getting her onto the horse was a challenge. Her leg throbbed with every movement, and her ribs protested the exertion. But Xander was patient, lifting her carefully and settling her in front of him on the saddle just as he had done 2 nights before. She leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady warmth of him, and they began the long ride back to Black Hawk. The journey took most of the day. The snow was deep in places, forcing them to detour around drifts that reached the horses' bellies. But Xander seemed to know every trail, every shortcut. As they rode, they passed the place where she had fallen into the ravine. Xander did not point it out, but she recognized the landscape, saw the torn branches and disturbed snow where his brothers had secured the rope. She shuddered, remembering how close she had come to death, and Xander's arm tightened around her waist in silent comfort. They reached Black Hawk as the sun was setting, painting the rough mining town in shades of orange and gold. People came running when they saw Xander's horse approaching with Zara cradled in his arms. News of her disappearance had spread, and a search party had been forming to go out at first light. There was shouting and questions and exclamations of relief. Xander carried her into her house, following the directions she gave, and laid her on her own bed in the small room off her medical office. Mrs. Henderson, the minister's wife and closest thing Zara had to a friend in town, immediately took charge. She shooed Xander out while she helped Zara into a proper nightgown and settled her under the covers. A young miner was dispatched to the Four Brothers Ranch to fetch Xander's father and the medical supplies they had mentioned. Another rider was sent to the Peterson Ranch with medicine from Zara's office stores. Through it all, Zara kept looking toward the door, hoping to catch another glimpse of Xander. But when Mrs. Henderson finally allowed visitors, it was Xavier who appeared, the oldest Parrish brother. He stood awkwardly at the foot of her bed, hat in his hands. "Xander had to get back to the ranch," he explained. "We have cattle scattered all over from the storm, and our father cannot round them all up alone, but he wanted me to check on you, make sure you were settled proper." Xavier shifted his weight. "He also wanted me to give you this." He handed her a small carved wooden bird, delicate and perfect. She recognized it as the piece Xander had been whittling that first night in the cabin. It was a hawk, she realized, wings spread in flight. Her fingers closed around it, and she felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you," she managed. "Please tell him thank you for everything." Xavier nodded and left, and Zara lay back against her pillows, the wooden hawk clutched in her hand. Mrs. Henderson bustled around, bringing tea and soup, but Zara barely tasted any of it. Her mind was miles away, at a ranch she had never seen, with a man she had known for barely 3 days but who had somehow become lodged firmly in her heart. The days that followed were busy. Zara's house became a revolving door of visitors checking on her recovery. The miners and their families brought food and firewood, grateful to have their doctor back alive. Mrs. Peterson sent word that she was recovering nicely thanks to the medicine. The mayor visited to officially thank her for her dedication and to scold her for taking such a risk. Through it all, Zara smiled and accepted their concern, but part of her attention was always elsewhere, always listening for a knock at the door that never came. 2 weeks passed. Her ribs healed enough that breathing no longer hurt. The gash on her forehead closed and began to fade to a scar. Her ankle was knitting properly, she could tell, though she would need to keep it splinted for at least another month. She could hobble around on her crutch, could see patients who came to her office, though she could not make house calls yet. She told herself she was being ridiculous. Xander had saved her life, had taken care of her because that was what any decent person would do. The connection she had felt between them had been born of circumstance and trauma, nothing more. He had his life at the ranch, and she had her life in town. There was no reason for him to visit, no reason to think he felt anything for her beyond the satisfaction of a rescue well done. But she kept the wooden hawk on her bedside table, and sometimes at night she would hold it and remember the sound of his voice in the darkness, the steadiness of his presence, the gentleness of his hands. It was early February when the knock finally came. Zara was in her office, examining the infected finger of a young miner, when Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway with an odd expression on her face. "You have a visitor," she said, her eyes twinkling. "A gentleman caller." Zara's heart leaped, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. She finished bandaging the miner's finger, gave him instructions for keeping it clean, and sent him on his way. Then she smoothed her dress, checked her hair in the small mirror on the wall, and told herself to calm down. It might not be him. It could be anyone. But when she hobbled into her sitting room, it was Xander standing there, hat in hands, looking around at her home with clear interest. He turned when he heard her crutch, and his face broke into a smile that made her knees weak. "Hello," he said, and just that one word in his voice was enough to make her feel warm all over. "Hello," she replied, suddenly shy. "This is a surprise." "A good one, I hope." He looked uncertain now, and she realized he was nervous. That made her feel better somehow. "I wanted to come sooner, but the storm scattered our herd all over the mountains. We have been riding from dawn to dusk trying to round them all up. And then I wanted to make sure you had time to recover, that I would not be intruding." "You are not intruding," she said quickly. "I am glad to see you. Would you like to sit? I could make coffee." They settled in her small sitting room, and Mrs. Henderson brought coffee and disappeared with remarkable tact. Xander looked around at the books lining the walls, at her father's medical instruments displayed in a case, at the warm, comfortable space she had created. "This is nice," he said. "It feels like a home." "I have tried to make it one," she said. "After my father died, I needed to make this space my own, not just a place where I worked but somewhere I could live too." They talked for an hour, catching up on the weeks since they had last seen each other. He told her about the ranch work, about finding most of the cattle but losing a few to the cold. She told him about her patience, about the slow healing of her own injuries. But beneath the casual conversation, something else hummed between them, a tension that had nothing to do with discomfort and everything to do with attraction. Finally, Xander set down his coffee cup and met her eyes directly. "I did not just come to check on you," he said. "I mean, I did want to make sure you were healing properly, but that is not the only reason." He took a breath. "I have not been able to stop thinking about you. These past weeks, you have been on my mind constantly. I keep remembering our conversations at the cabin, the way you laughed, the strength you showed even when you were hurt. And I realized I wanted to know you better, wanted to see if what I felt during those days was real or just circumstance." Zara's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "What did you feel?" "Like I had found something I did not even know I was looking for," he said simply. "Like you were someone I wanted in my life, not just for a few days but for much longer. I know it is fast, and I know we barely know each other really, but I would like the chance to change that, if you would be willing." She thought about the wooden hawk on her bedside table, about the hours she had spent thinking about him, about the way her heart had leaped when Mrs. Henderson said she had a visitor. She thought about the connection she had felt with him, the ease of their conversations, the gentleness of his touch. And she thought about what her father had always told her, that life was short, that happiness was rare, and that when you found something good you should hold on to it with both hands. "I would like that," she said, and watched his face transform with relief and joy. "I have thought about you too. More than I probably should have." He reached across the space between them and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Then we will take this slow, do it properly. I will court you the way a lady should be courted. I will visit when I can, and maybe when your leg heals you could come out to the ranch, meet my family properly. We will see where this leads." "That sounds perfect," she said, and meant it. Over the months that followed, Xander became a regular presence in her life. He visited Black Hawk twice a week when ranch work allowed, always bringing small gifts. Wildflowers in spring, fresh beef. Once a new medical text he had ordered from Denver because he had heard her mention needing it. They took walks when her leg healed enough to allow it, her hand tucked into his arm as they strolled through the mountain meadows surrounding the town. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories, dreams, fears. In April, Zara finally made the journey to the Four Brothers Ranch. Xander arrived with a wagon to make the ride easier on her still healing ankle, and they spent the 2-hour journey talking and laughing. The ranch was impressive, sprawling across a valley with the mountains rising behind it. The main house was large and well-maintained, clearly built with love and care. Xander's father, a gruff man in his 60s with the same storm-gray eyes as his son's, welcomed her with surprising warmth. "So you are the woman who captured my son's heart," he said, taking her hand. "He has talked about nothing else for months. Welcome to our home." Xavier, Xylon, and Xerxes were friendly and teasing, clearly delighted to see their brother so happy. They regaled her with embarrassing stories about Xander's childhood, about his tendency to rescue injured animals and his stubborn refusal to give up once. He set his mind to something. Xander bore it all with good humor, his hand finding hers under the table during dinner, his eyes warm when they met hers. She visited the cabin where he had taken her that night, finding it just as she remembered, small and functional, but now holding precious memories. They stood inside together, and Xander pulled her into his arms, careful of her healing leg. "This is where I knew," he said softly. "That first night watching you sleep, seeing how you pushed through the pain to tell me how to set your leg properly. I knew then that you were extraordinary. I knew I wanted to find a way to keep you in my life. I knew in the ravine," she admitted. "When I heard your voice calling down to me, it felt like you were bringing me back from death itself. And then in those days we spent here, I kept thinking how right it felt to be with you, how easy. I had never felt that before with anyone." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and she felt the last of her doubts melt away. This was real. This was right. Whatever had brought them together that night, fate or chance or Xander's inexplicable instinct, she was grateful for it. In June, Xander asked her to marry him. They were sitting by the creek that ran through her property behind her house, watching the sun set over the mountains. He pulled a ring from his pocket, simple gold with a small diamond, and took her hand. "I know it has only been 6 months," he said. "But I am 30 years old, and I know my own mind. I love you, Zara Caldwell. I love your strength and your intelligence and your dedication to helping people. I love the way you laugh and the way you challenge me and the way you are not afraid to speak your mind. I want to build a life with you, want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes. I love you too, Xander Parrish. I have loved you since you climbed down into that ravine to save me. You gave me back my life, and now I want to share it with you." They were married in August of 1883, on a perfect mountain morning with wildflowers in bloom and the sky so blue it hurt to look at. The ceremony was held at the ranch, with half of Black Hawk in attendance along with Xander's family and neighboring ranchers. Mrs. Henderson cried happy tears through the entire service. Zara wore a dress of ivory silk that had belonged to Xander's mother, altered to fit her by his father's own hands, a gift that moved her beyond words. The question of where they would live had been a difficult one. Zara was determined to continue her medical practice, and Black Hawk needed her. But Xander had responsibilities at the ranch. They compromised. Zara would keep her office in Black Hawk and continue seeing patients there 3 days a week. The other 4 days she would be at the ranch, where Xander would build her a new office so she could see patients from the surrounding area who found it difficult to reach town. It was not a perfect solution, but it was one they could both live with. Xander proved as good as his word. By their first anniversary, he had built her a beautiful office attached to the ranch house, complete with an examination room, a surgery, and storage for supplies. She began seeing the ranch families and miners from the camps too far from Black Hawk to reach easily. Her practice grew, and she found fulfillment in being able to help more people. Their life together settled into a rhythm. Zara had never imagined she could be this happy, that marriage could be a partnership of equals. Xander respected her work, understood her need to help her patients. He never asked her to choose between him and her calling, and she learned the rhythms of ranch life, came to appreciate the hard work and dedication it required. She learned to ride properly, though she still felt nervous on steep mountain trails. She learned to read the weather and to understand the patterns of the cattle. She became part of the Parrish family, sister to Xander's brothers, daughter to his father. In the spring of 1885, she gave birth to their first child, a son they named William after her father. The birth was difficult. and she was grateful to have another doctor present, a young man named Samuel, who had recently opened a practice in Black Hawk, and with whom she had formed a collegial friendship. Xander paced outside the room during the labor, his brothers keeping him company, and when Samuel finally emerged to tell him he had a son, he burst into the room with tears streaming down his face. "You did it," he said, gathering her and the baby into his arms. "You are amazing. Look at him. Look at our son." William had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. He was perfect. Zara held him and felt a love so fierce it frightened her. She had thought she understood love after marrying Xander, but this was different, primal, a need to protect this tiny life at all costs. 2 years later, their daughter was born, a tiny red-faced girl they named Catherine after Xander's mother. The birth was easier this time, and Zara was back on her feet within a week, much to everyone's dismay. But she had patients who needed her, and sitting idle drove her mad. Xander learned to simply keep a closer eye on her, to make sure she did not overexert herself. Life was full. Zara's days were spent with her children and her patients, her evenings with Xander and his family. She taught William and Catherine to read, filled their minds with knowledge and wonder. Xander taught them to ride and to respect the land, to understand the value of hard work. Together they built a life rich in love and purpose. On a cold December evening in 1892, 10 years after Zara's fall into the ravine, she and Xander stood on the porch of their ranch house watching the snow fall. The children were asleep inside, and for a moment it was just the two of them, as it had been in that cabin so long ago. "Do you remember that night?" Xander asked, his arm around her shoulders. "When I found you in the ravine?" "I remember everything," she said. "I remember thinking I was going to die and then hearing your voice. I remember you climbing down through that storm to reach me. I remember those days in the cabin, getting to know you. Sometimes I still cannot believe all of this happened, that we built this life together." "I knew that night," he said, "when I was riding through that storm and I had that feeling someone needed help. Something in me understood that my life was about to change forever. I just did not know how right I was." He pulled her closer. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Zara. You and our children and this life we have made. I would climb down 1,000 ravines in 1,000 snowstorms if it meant finding you again." She turned in his arms and kissed him, this man who had saved her life and then given her a reason to live it fully. "I love you," she said. "Now and always." "Now and always," he echoed. They stood together watching the snow fall. Two people who had found each other in the darkness and the cold, and had built something warm and lasting in the light. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the promise of more snows, more springs, more years together. Inside, their children slept safely, and tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys. But tonight, this moment was perfect. Zara thought back to that terrified woman clinging to a ledge in a ravine, certain she was about to die, and marveled at how life could change in an instant. One moment she had been alone in the darkness, and the next a rope had come down from above, bringing salvation and love in equal measure. She had nearly died that night, but instead she had found a reason to truly live. She had found her home, her heart, her forever in the most unlikely of circumstances. And as Xander pulled her inside to warmth and light, to their children and their life together, Zara sent up a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever force had sent him searching through that storm. She was grateful for his stubborn insistence that someone was out there. She was grateful for his courage in climbing down into that ravine. She was grateful for every moment that had led her to this place, this man, this life. They grew old together on that ranch, watching their children grow and have families of their own. William became a veterinarian, combining his mother's medical knowledge with his father's love of animals. Catherine followed her mother's footsteps and became a doctor, one of the first women to graduate from the medical school in Denver. Both married and gave Zara and Xander grandchildren who filled the ranch house with laughter and chaos. Zara continued her medical practice until she was nearly 70, finally retiring when her hands began to shake too much for delicate work. Xander worked the ranch until his bones were too stiff to sit a horse all day, and then he taught his grandsons everything he knew, passing on the knowledge his father had given him. Together they watched the new century dawn, marveling at the changes it brought while holding fast to the values that had guided them through their lives. When Xander died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 85, Zara held his hand and whispered all the things she loved about him, reminded him of that night he had saved her, thanked him for every day they had shared. She told him she would see him again, that this was not goodbye but only farewell for now. And when she closed her eyes for the last time 3 years later, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, her last thought was of a voice calling down through a snowstorm, of strong hands pulling her to safety, of a love that had begun in darkness and had illuminated her entire life. The wooden hawk Xander had carved for her was buried with her, clutched in her hands, a symbol of the moment everything had changed. And on her gravestone, next to Xander's, was carved a simple epitaph that told their story. She fell. He caught her. Together they soared. Their love story became legend in Black Hawk and the surrounding ranches, told and retold by those who had known them. It became a reminder that fate could work in mysterious ways, that love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that courage and kindness could change the course of entire lives. And whenever storms rolled through those mountains, when snow fell thick and wind howled through the pines, people would remember the doctor who fell into a ravine, and the cowboy who climbed down with a rope to save her, and they would smile at the romance of it all, at the perfect improbability of two souls finding each other in the darkness and choosing to walk together into the light.